Today we're going to talk about how late stage capitalism promote rent seeking and rent extraction instead of creating real value. I'm going to go over recent news that there was a fee on Chinese ships that comes to US ports that they need to pay certain fees, and this action created more trade tension between US and China and created a backlash in Chinese system that they needed to put the same amount of fees on US ships that go to China, and also they came up with the new restriction on rare earth materials, rare earth minerals. So I want to go over why these behaviors happen, tariffs that we see is changing. We see that we have fees on different areas, fees on ships, fees on ports, even ports that are not inside the US. For example, there was an attempt to collect fees for Panama Canal on Chinese ships. So we see more rent seeking and rent extractions from these recent actions. So why in late stage capitalism, both domestically and internationally, a country that are really wrestling with late stage capitalism need to, instead of creating real value, need to seek rent and absorb as much as money from the previous value that was created many years or decades ago. We see that in late stage capitalism, domestically means inside the US, when people before go to restaurant, they want to have food, and when they sit, they receive a service. So of course there is a tip on that service they receive in a restaurant. But we see that exactly like late stage capitalism in international arena, we see that even people that want to pick up their food, or people that they did not receive any service, meaning service that presented inside the restaurant as something like environment, using an environment of restaurant, they ask to pay tips even for people who want to pick up their food. So this is a rent extraction because when their other avenues for value making is closed and the cost of living is increasing tremendously, so they need to find a way to compensate the difference. In international arena, we see the same thing. When a country that created values, for example, 70, 80, 60, 50 years ago, by having a solid industrial base, it created value, and that value was shared with the world, and it was benefited many countries. But because that value is not there anymore, we are facing a situation that the venue for collecting money becomes smaller and smaller. And in order to keep up with all these expenses, there need to be more and more rent extraction from the previous value that was created. For example, what was created before a dollar-based system was created before that allowed creation of cheap credit inside the US that makes it the biggest consumer market in the world. So this value that was created kind of led people around the world to produce value and then sell it to a country that have access to cheap credit. That's why we see many ships are coming from all over the world and bring products to the US for the consumer in the US to use those products, buy those products, purchase those products. But as you see, because this value, this dollar-based system that was based on solid industrial base, the solid industrial base is not there anymore, but the legacy of that means dollar-based system is there. That's why you have access to cheap credit. That's why you have consumer that could consume, and you become a bigger consumer market in the world. Then other countries want to sell to you, but then with this regular free market transaction, you cannot fund all the expenses you have. You need to start asking for fees, asking for tips, exactly like in a restaurant. You need to ask for fees. You need to put tariffs to extract some money from this transaction. Is it sustainable in long term? Is it sustainable in medium term, or is it sustainable in short term? In short term, it's sustainable because these routes, these trade relationship has not been created overnight. So it's been a long time to this trade relationship to develop and come to this point. So in short term, it's sustainable, and you could seek more and more rent and don't create any value. But in medium term is fragile, and in long term is completely unstable, because at the end of the day, what people are looking for is value, creation of value. Creation of value is something that needs to be solid, needs to be based on industrial base, and needs to be supported with consumer that willing to pay for those values. And this is not gonna happen in a long run, because in the long run, countries start to realizing instead of paying this rent to the US, they could keep their own value, means the value they create in their factories. Based on the value they create, they keep those values, and they could, if other countries have good terms of trade, they could trade their values with other countries without giving rent to those countries. So in medium and long term, we're gonna have the situation that more and more countries gonna trade with each other, because there is no rent seeking there, and it's pure trade within countries. And the country that is in late stage capitalism and desperately need to get those rent to compensate for the shortage of money for the deficit is gonna be sidelined, and because there is no other option to fund those deficits, that's why they need to go for rent. So The fees on shipping is another layer of rent extraction and rent seeking based on value that was created many decades ago, and the fundamental for that value is not there anymore. That's why in late stage capitalism, countries go for rent seeking and businesses go for ways to compensate the wage that they need to give to their workers. That was for today. Thank you, everyone.